Hello everyone, this is Mr. Prometheus, and welcome to the first installment of my comprehensive Mesmer guide. I created this guide because from what I've gathered on various message boards, the general consensus on the profession is that Mesmers do less damage overall and are generally weaker than the other professions. Then, on the other hand, there's a very small percentage of players, myself included, who disagree with this and will tell you that the Mesmer is a very strong profession, and in some cases brings unique benefits to groups. Why then is there such a huge disparity between the tiny subset of Mesmers who think the class is great and the larger population who believe that the class is underpowered? I believe the major underlying reason is that Mesmers are largely misunderstood, and with that misunderstanding comes frustration, sometimes to the point of players re-rolling to a different profession. This guide has been designed to be a complete look at the profession, from the very basic to advanced techniques. Over the course of a few videos, we'll discuss all of the weapons, slot skills, and traits. And more importantly than simply telling you what all of them do, we're going to explore their practical application in PvE and PvP, and overall how they fit into the Mesmer's toolkit. The first thing then we need to discuss is what is a Mesmer. From a design and flavor perspective, the Mesmer is a wizard that uses deception and chaos to gain advantage over their opponents. Much of the Mesmer's gameplay is about distracting enemies from attacking you directly, and causing confusion and uncertainty. Additionally, many of the Mesmer's abilities have a dual nature. What this means is that they simultaneously do something bad to an enemy while benefiting the caster and their allies. The core class mechanic on the F1 through F4 keys are called shatters, which pertain to the various illusions that Mesmers can summon. And we can't actually talk about shattering until we first discuss what these illusions are. Part 1 then will cover the Mesmer's illusions, and then we're going to go into detailed description of each of the Mesmer's weapon choices. This video is going to be quite long, so I will put links in the description so you can hop around to the weapon you'd like to know the most about. So, my fellow purveyors of purple butterflies, whether you're just starting out or if you're already level 80, I really hope you can find something useful in this guide. Let's dive right in. The first type of illusion that I would like to discuss are called clones. As you can see here, I have summoned 3 clones that are attacking this target golem. They look exactly like my character in every way, and even have my character's name. To a random passerby, I am totally indistinguishable from these clones. Besides appearing identical to my character, clones also have some other defining characteristics that easily differentiate them from the other illusions Mesmers can summon, called phantasms. Clones have extremely low health, and as you can see, they also do a negligible amount of damage. You may be asking yourself why someone would bother summoning clones in the first place. There are actually several reasons. In PvE, mobs will often attack your clones, and every hit one of them takes is a hit that you don't have to. They are also extremely good at fooling your opponents in PvP, and I'm sure many of you have experienced the frustration of attacking a clone firsthand. Finally, clones fuel your shatters. As you can see down here, the F1 through F4 abilities are various shatters that Mesmers have available to them. In general, the more clones that you have up, the more powerful the shatter becomes. For right now, we only need to focus on one shatter, Mind Rack. It's very simple in its execution. It deals damage that increases with the amount of clones that were shattered. So, if I decide to push this button, you will see that clones will run to the target and explode. The next thing we want to talk about is the other type of illusion that Mesmers are able to summon, and they're called phantasms. This one you've probably seen before. It's known as the Illusionary Duelist, and it looks very similar to my character, however it is ghostly purple and has different weapons equipped than the character that I am currently playing. That's how you distinguish a phantasm from a clone, is that phantasms sort of have their own personality about them. You can also see that a phantasm does quite a lot of damage. They do a far more significant amount of damage than clones do. In fact, they do comparable damage to the Mesmer themselves, and phantasms are a source of Mesmer DPS.
Refreshing.
You can also shatter them. Now I only have one available, but I am going to send it into shatter after its next round, and you can see that the shatter doesn't change. It's the same effect regardless. Now they didn't quite kill that mob, so let me just pull it out of its misery. But that's the concept behind phantasms. The last thing I'd like to mention about clones and phantasms is that when you have 3 up and you use an ability that tries to summon a clone or phantasm, it will wipe away the oldest clone. So I summon these 3 clones in this order, 1, 2, and 3. So when I summon a new clone, I'm going to actually end up wiping this clone off of the field. And you can see that right there, it decides to blow itself up. Now keep in mind, if that happens, it doesn't mind rack. It doesn't do any damage. The clone just disappears off the face of the earth. Similar to if I were to summon a Phantasm. Now if I do that, this clone is going to get wiped off. So watch, and I'll go ahead and do that. And it gets rid of this clone. Now if I summon another clone, this clone is going to get wiped off. And then if I summon another, this will get wiped off. But there is one feature that is interesting and very helpful, is that a clone will never overwrite a Phantasm if possible. So as I summon another clone here, the next clone that I summon will not get rid of this Phantasm. It's actually going to get rid of this clone, which is really, really helpful because Phantasms are so integral to the DPS of a Mesmer. So if I summon here, you can see that the Duelist is still up, and this clone died, the green one here, and this clone is now the replacement. The first weapon we'll be discussing is the Scepter. Now the Scepter is the first weapon that you encounter when you roll a Mesmer. It's the first weapon that they have. Its normal attack is a chain, as they all are, and it throws purple balls. Now the third hit on the chain creates a clone at the location. So you can see that we've just created our first clone here. So every 3 hits, 1, 2, 3, it creates a clone. This is kind of cool, but unfortunately the clones don't do very much damage. So you need to be in a very shatter heavy build if you want to be using the Scepter for its clone production. Again, 3 hits and you have clones up. Now, if you auto attack and keep attacking with the Scepter, what's going to end up happening is you're going to start wiping your clones away. And you can see that here, is that I'm just wiping clones and creating new ones in their place, which is not really that good. So there is a specific method to using the Scepter if you're using it for damage, and that is that on essentially right before every 12th hit of the Scepter, you shatter. And that will basically make the most efficient use of your clones. So 1, 2, 3, this is going to be the first clone here. 1, 2, 3, the second clone here. And then 1, 2, 3, the third clone. Now, right before the third one's going to hit, 1, 2, I'm going to shatter. Shatter, 3, and a new clone has been created. That way, the clone isn't wasted with just disappearing into the middle of nowhere because of the auto attack. The Scepter used to be a lot weaker than it is now because earlier in betas, clones did not have a preference to wipe clones before Phantasms, so you'd lose your Phantasms by auto-attacking with the Scepter, which is pretty terrible. So that's been taken care of. The second ability on the Scepter is called Illusionary Counter, and when you push that button, your character just holds their arm out in front of themselves like that, and what ends up causing, it's basically a block. So all that happens is your character blocks an attack, and in this game, blocking is a full damage reduction. So you will actually block an entire attack and take no damage from it. In addition, if you do successfully block, it will do some extra damage, and you'll get the opportunity to blind your target. So it's not a bad defensive spell, but there are certainly better that the Mesmer has access to. In addition, and I'm sure you can see this, the main attack doesn't do very much damage in comparison to some of the other things, including even the Phantasms that the Mesmer has access to. So I am not very impressed with that. The third ability is called Confusing Images, and what this does is it's a channeled beam that does damage to the target and stacks up confusion. So this is going to be the first time that we explore confusion. So let me cast the spell first, and you can see that 5 stacks of confusion were put on the target. Now, confusion is a condition that's fairly unique. Some other classes have access to it, but Mesmers have the most. And what confusion is that if any target that has confusion on it does anything, any ability, then they take damage. And they'll take more damage for the more stacks of confusion that are on them. What that means for you as a player is that confusion actually happens to be extremely good in PvP because players tend not to see it and they tend to kill themselves. However, in PvE, it's not reliable, specifically because mobs don't use abilities in the most reliable ways, and as a Mesmer, you're fairly squishy and you want to be kiting. So even though this does quite a lot of damage and you can move around while it's being cast, the confusion isn't really all that exciting for PvE. Overall, this weapon is okay. It's really best used in an ability, in a build that really wants to take advantage of shattering quite a lot, or a build that wants to stack confusion. Overall though, I'm not so impressed with it, and I think that the Scepter gets a solid C letter grade, because it is really just very run-of-the-mill and not that exciting. The next weapon we'll discuss is the sword. This weapon can be used as a main hand or an offhand for the Mesmer, and they can be dual wielded. It is the only other main-handed weapon that Mesmers do have access to, and in my opinion it happens to be a better weapon than the Scepter in almost every scenario. Its main attack is a three-part chain, as most attacks are. The first two attacks stack vulnerability, and then the third attack removes a boon. It's a pretty basic and straightforward, just sword swing type of attack. Where the sword really shines is its number 2 ability, which is called Blurred Frenzy. Now, you just push it. It's called it's an animation lock. That's how it's described, meaning that you can't really do anything except Blurred Frenzy when you've pushed the button. But when you push it, your character does several strikes in a row. So that did about 3,000 damage. Additionally, what Blurred Frenzy does is it adds distortion, which means that you are going to evade all attacks for the duration of Blurred Frenzy. So if you look down here, when I cast Blurred Frenzy again, I also gain, it's called Blur in the tooltip, but it's also known as distortion. And essentially what that means is that you become completely invulnerable from everything while you are Blurred Frenzying. This is extremely important for a multitude of reasons. The sword is often used as an up-close weapon for a short period of time so that you can get a Blurred Frenzy off, and then you go back to being ranged. But if something melee does close with you, it can actually be used defensively. And this is part of what I meant by a lot of the abilities Mesmers have they incorporate a dual nature. Blurred Frenzy is definitely one of those things that has offensive and defensive capabilities, and that is not exactly true for the Scepter. The blocking ability on the Scepter is not really equivalent in that particular regard. The third attack here is the clone summoning ability for the sword. Now, if you notice, the Scepter and the sword both don't have phantasm summons, and there's a reason for that. A Mesmer, when they're equipped with any weapons loadout, will always have access to a clone summoning spell and a phantasm summoning spell. If you're using one-handed weapons, however, the clone summoners are always on the one-handed weapon, and the phantasm summoning abilities are always on the offhand. So every single Mesmer phantasm comes in the offhanded weapons is one of those two spells. And we'll go over those in just a little bit. Essentially what you do with this spell called Illusionary Leap is you cast a clone and it summons it on the target. Now, since the clone is using the sword's number 1 attack, which is for vulnerability, it's actually stacking vulnerability on the boss. Now, the basic spec that I've also got some bleeds going, because whenever my clones crit, it puts a bleed on the target. This is a talent that you can pick up, and I'll go over exactly what that is a little later, but it does add some power to your clones, which can be extremely helpful when you're trying to go an offensive build. There's another feature of the Illusionary Leap that makes it very, very strong, and if you look at the tooltip here, you can see it says swap, and it says swap places with your clone and you immobilize nearby foes. So if I'm going to push this really quickly, but if you look at number 3 down here, I'm going to cast it and then it becomes available, swap becomes available. It'll burn off in just a moment, so you can see it come off. So we're going to let this clone just attack away here, and I'll cast it again. And when I cast it again, I'm going to trade places with the clone, and then this clone here, this was me, and this is me now right here. So the difference is that it's essentially a gap closer. It's a short gap closer, but it is a gap closer. So you can trade places, and then your target is immobilized. So one of the things that you can do if you're using swap is you can use it to close the gap with an enemy. Let me just attack this golem instead. And then immediately Blurred Frenzy, and the enemy is immobilized for the duration of the Blurred Frenzy, which really can be very helpful when you're trying to stop someone from attacking. Blurred Frenzy keeps you stationary, so someone can just roll away from it. So if you immobilize them first, that's not really going to happen. Additionally, another thing about the Illusionary Leap swap ability is that these are both combo finisher leaps. And what that means, and we haven't really gone into this, but what combo finishers are is something that we need to touch on. So Mesmers primarily have access to something called a ethereal combo field, and if you look down here, you can see This null field, which is one of the utilities that Mesmers have access to, creates a field of energy. It rips all boons from foes and cures all conditions on allies. So as you stand in it, it'll remove all of your conditions, and it will also remove all boons from enemies. This is, again, another spell that has a beneficial effect for the people in it that you are allied with and yourself, and it has a negative effect for the people that it's also affecting that are your enemies. If you look, it's a reticle ability, and a reticle is essentially the word for this green circle that's on the ground. So you can target it and put it wherever you like. And if you look, it says that it's a combo field ethereal. So when you get a combo field, such as a combo field ethereal, plus a finisher, such as combo finisher leap, you get an added effect. It just so happens that the added effect in this particular case is a chaos armor on the target. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this down here, and then I'm going to illusionary leap. And you can see that I've gained chaos armor. And additionally, the clone gains chaos armor as well. Now we'll go over what exactly chaos armor is in a little bit when we cover the staff, because it's a spell that can be cast by the staff. But for purposes of just displaying what's going on, this combo finisher leap gives you an opportunity to add different effects to the fight or to yourself. For example, if you're standing in a fire combo field, it'll add a fire shield instead. This is a feature that the sword has that isn't on the staff, the Scepter. The Scepter does not have the ability to add or do any combos whatsoever, which is another reason why I believe it has an edge. Additionally, the clones from the sword, as we've seen, the bleeding we can disregard because a Scepter clone can do that if you are spec'd for it. However, the vulnerability is something that only the sword clone is able to add, which means that even though they don't do very much damage, the vulnerability goes between 2 and 4 stacks as the clone auto attacks, which means that if you summon one, it's not useless, whereas the Scepter's clone is useless and really only good for shattering. If you and a couple of clones are attacking, you can see, this will probably die pretty fast, but you can see that the vulnerability stacks are going to go up significantly as well. I'm not auto attacking either because I don't want it to die. But with 2 clones up, the vulnerability goes up to 6, and overall the sword is a very, very strong weapon, both because of its dual nature in the ability in Blurred Frenzy, and also because you can put a combo finisher together that you can't actually do with the Scepter. It is obviously not a ranged weapon, but there will be definite opportunities for you to illusionary leap in, use Blurred Frenzy, and then leave. Because of all of these reasons, I believe that it does have an edge over the Scepter in just about every scenario. The only scenario where I would choose a Scepter instead is if I was running a Confusion build, because even in a Shatter-based build, the sword is fine at creating clones. You don't really need to pump out clones that often. And if you notice, the Scepter attack, the 3 attacks to create a clone, is actually about the same time, maybe even a little shorter, than the cooldown on creating a clone on the sword. So for a multitude of reasons, I believe that the sword is a much stronger weapon, and I would recommend that if you are playing Mesmer, you should probably be using a sword if you wanted to play a one-handed and offhand build in some variety. You should include the sword as your one-hander for most purposes. Given all of this, I definitely think that the sword deserves a solid A rating, an A letter grade, and I use it often, and I think that you should too. The next weapon we can discuss is the sword in the offhand rather than in the main hand. The Phantasm is on the number 5 key. This is not consistent among all of the offhanded weapons that a Mesmer has access to. Sometimes the Phantasm is on the number 4 key. We can summon the Phantasm first and take a look at it. It is called the Phantasmal Swordsman, and what it does is it jumps into the target and then smacks them and then jumps backward. The bleeds that you'll see, just disregard. It happens when the Phantasm crits, and that is due to a talent that I chose or a trait that I chose. But for the purposes of this particular Phantasm, we can ignore the bleed. As you can see, the damage is fairly high, 2,700 on a heavy target golem on a crit, and about 1,500 on a non-crit. It is a very strong Phantasm in that regard. Additionally, if you look at the tooltip, it says that it is a combo finisher leap. So if you do summon the Phantasm and then put an ethereal combo field down, which is what you'll have access to for the majority of the time, it will leap in and then give itself Chaos Armor. Now, it doesn't give you Chaos Armor, but giving itself Chaos Armor is helpful if it is being attacked. It's always a good thing to have. So if you can summon the Phantasm inside of an ethereal field, it will give itself Chaos Armor on its first jump, which is very, very strong. The jump back also is extremely important because it keeps the Phantasm out of melee range, so it's safe, and then it jumps in, does its attack, and then it goes back to safety. In that way, it is sort of like a ranged Phantasm, and it is very, very strong in that regard. The other ability is called Counterblade. Now, you have to be in combat for Counterblade for you to be able to see all of what Counterblade and Illusionary Riposte is able to do. It's a blocking ability, so primarily when you push it, your character will hold their weapon in front of themselves and try to block an attack. And if you do successfully block an attack, you will do a counter attack and do some extra damage. However, if you decide to push the button again while the block is happening, you'll get another spell, which is called Counterblade. And essentially what that spell does, and we'll cast it right here, is it's a bolt that gets shot into the enemy with a tiny amount of damage, and it dazes them. Now, the daze, and we won't see that on the tooltip until the spell cools off, but the daze is a stun, essentially. It's not really a full stun, but what it does is it stops all damage and activity from the target. So the target is unable to use all abilities for that period of time. So if we look, it's a 1 second daze there. This is really strong. This is really, really strong. It's especially strong in PvP, but can be very, very strong in PvE as well. So if you enter combat in some capacity, and I'll just do that with the Scepter really quickly. If you enter combat and then you want to just throw the ball, you can actually just do that. You can throw it out there and then ignore the rest of the blocking ability on the sword. I do find the sword as an offhanded weapon to be extremely strong. I think that there may be some better options out there, but I think that the sword is one of the more solid, and it's very, very simple in its execution. It's it's a guy that jumps around, and it's a blocking attack that you can use to stun or stop your opponents. It's not officially a stun. For that reason, I think that the sword deserves an A-. You can definitely use it to great effect, and I wouldn't bemoan anyone from using it. I think that it is a very, very good weapon. The next weapon we can discuss is the Torch, which is an offhanded only weapon. Its phantasm is called the Phantasmal Mage, and what it does is it shoots a bolt out that hits the target and puts a confusion stack on them, and the bolt then bounces to a friendly target and then puts retaliation on that target. So if you are well positioned, what you can do is take advantage of that, and you can see that actually it's trying to bounce to another friendly target as well. So if I move over here, it should actually bounce to this next person. It doesn't quite make it, it's just out of range, but it will bounce a couple of times. You can notice also that the confusion stack goes goes from 2 and then back down to 1. If you have multiple of these guys up, obviously you'll be able to stack some decent confusion. And retaliation is something that it's a boon that reflects incoming damage back to its source. So it's another example of the Mesmer bad for you, good for me type of thing that is very common with many of their abilities. In addition to this phantasm, which is it's good if you want to do a confusion heavy build, there's an ability on the Torch called the Prestige. Now what the Prestige does is it blinds your foe when you go into stealth. So you push the button and it gets a blind up, and you actually go into stealth here. And then when you release out of stealth, you explode, and that explosion causes burning to the target. It ticks for about 3 times for 711 damage. This is a full condition build that I'm in right now, so that you can get an idea as to sort of the maximum that this will do. I find the Prestige to be very helpful. It's a fantastic group ability because you can blind everything in an AoE, which means that every single target that you hit with it will miss its next attack, and then you can damage all of them when you come out of the stealth. In addition, this is a combo finisher blast, and this is the first blast combo finisher that we've seen. It's actually the only one that Mesmers have access to. If you put down an ethereal combo field, what a combo finisher blast will do is it will give AoE Chaos Armor to every target within it. So if I go ahead and summon up some clones here and then put this down and go into the Prestige, what I'll do is as soon as this is complete, it'll give Chaos Armor to everything in the field, and it actually gave it to some allies here and this Bone Minion. This is really, really good if you are in a group, especially in a dungeon, it can be very, very helpful. Chaos Armor will go over the specifics of what it is, but one of the things it does is it gives protection, which is a third less damage incoming. It does some other stuff too. It's a really cool spell, but having the ability to do that is very strong. So if you do have an ethereal combo field in a utility or off of a weapon, you can put it down and then use the prestige. It's very, very strong in PvP as well, and in PvE for another reason, and that's because it puts you into stealth. You can understand immediately why that would be good in PvE, in PvP, but in PvE it's also really strong because if a mob is coming at you, you can use the prestige to make the mob turn around and pay attention to something else. The confusion on the Phantasm is not so strong in PvE, and that's simply because mobs don't use abilities reliably enough to make confusion worth it. But some people will use the torch in conjunction with the Scepter and stack lots of confusion on the target all at once, and use that as in a very high condition damage build. And actually, as we're standing closer to one another, you can see that the ball is bouncing from me and then to this person as well, so they're also getting retaliation. So the Illusionary Mage does a couple of interesting things. I don't particularly like this Phantasm in PvE, but I do like the blast finisher off of the prestige. So if you're playing a supporty type build, this can be very good to blind everything in an area and then to blast it out of a ethereal combo field and give all of your friends chaos armor. Overall, I think that the torch is a very solid weapon. I do use it in PvE and PvP quite often. I would give it a B+ letter grade. The next offhanded weapon that we're going to discuss is the pistol. Now, unfortunately, the pistol is only usable as an offhand, although I would absolutely love it as a main-handed weapon as well. The Phantasm on the pistol is on the number 4 key, and that's a little weird because it's the only offhanded weapon where the Phantasm is on the 4 key and not the 5 key. So that can be a little odd if you are trying to summon one and you are using a pistol after having used several other Phantasm summoning abilities from the other offhanded weapons. But we've seen this before, we saw it earlier in the video, and it's the Illusionary Duelist who fires a bunch of shots. Now you notice that there's a ton of bleeds on the target as well, and the reason for all of the bleeds is because every single shot that the Duelist makes is considered its own individual attack. So when you choose the trait that says that your illusions inflict bleeding on critical hits, every single attack is considered a critical hit independently of one another. So if all 8 shots from the Duelist crit, then you'll get 8 stacks of bleeding, but more often you'll get between 3 and 5 depending on your critical strike chance and your luck. The Duelist also stands at range and happily fires into the target, which is really helpful. It keeps it nice and safe. And if you look here, it says that the combo finisher is a 20% chance for physical projectile. Now what that means is that you'll get the physical projectile effect 20% of the time. And this is common on most of those abilities that shoot often. So let's see what happens when we do that. What will happen for an ethereal combo field, which is our main combo field, is that the target gets stacks of confusion. Now, we saw a 5 there, and that means that 5 out of the 8 shots actually put a stack of confusion on the target. So that was a pretty good one, and you won't see that as often. You don't necessarily need to play for that when the pistol is being used. However, if you do have an opportunity to put an ethereal combo field down on the target where your pistol is shooting, you can get that added confusion benefit, and if the target happens to use some sort of ability, you can take advantage. The next ability that the pistol has is called Magic Bullet. A lot of people like this in PvP because it's a great crowd control ability. It's also quite strong in PvE, although it's a bit harder to control. Essentially what happens is it shoots the main target and then the bullet bounces to 2 others. So you can see that that's what's going to happen here. It bounced to all 3. Now the first target gets dazed. The first target gets blinded, the second target gets dazed, and the third target gets stunned. So what that really means is that 3 targets are some sort of their damage output is hindered in some way. Daze being, a lockup of all abilities, blind meaning that the next attack is going to miss, and then stun meaning that they just can't do anything for the duration of the stun. It's not a particularly long crowd control, and you can see that by the time I even just click over to the third, the blind actually does last for a long time, but the stun and the daze do not. The nice thing about this is if you have one target and there's nothing else around to bounce, then it'll get all three effects, essentially being stunned for a period of time. And it's very, very good in conjunction with the sword. If the illusionary leap is not available, you can actually stun something and then pop in and use blurred frenzy on the target, and hopefully that target will stand still for a majority of the time. I think the pistol is a very, very strong weapon. Its combo finisher potential is a little harder to control than some of the other weapons out there, but it is extremely strong if you can get lots of stacks of confusion on the target, and I think that the pistol deserves a solid A- rating. The next weapon I'd like to discuss is the Focus, which is the final offhanded weapon that Mesmers have access to. Its non-phantasm ability is called Temporal Curtain, and you can see it's a reticle ability. The reticle is a line in this particular case, and if you put it down, it gives anyone crossing it that's an ally swiftness, which means that they run faster. Additionally, any enemy that crosses over it will be crippled, which means that they will move slower. So it's very, very good for kiting. Additionally, the Focus has, this Temporal Curtain ability has a lot of other things going on for it. If you push the button again before the duration of the Temporal Curtain is done, you'll actually end up pulling all of your targets through the Temporal Curtain and towards you. So if I push this button and then push it again, it's going to pull all these guys through it, which is really, really nice. This is especially helpful when you take into consideration the phantasm that the Focus summons, which is called the Illusionary Warden. Now what the Illusionary Warden does is an AoE attack that hits everything in range. And you can see that it does quite a lot of damage. It actually does the most damage of any phantasm that the Mesmer has access to, and that's because it has one very distinct weakness that you need it to compensate for, essentially. And the weakness is that if the target is moved away, so if a player or a mob moves away from the phantasm, then the phantasm will try to target it, but it won't be able to do anything because it's stationary. It's completely stationary and it won't move at all. It'll just stand there spinning and spinning for the rest of its life. Now, another interesting thing is that while it's doing this spinning attack, it is reflecting all projectiles that are coming at it. So if you stand inside of it, you can actually reflect projectiles as well, which can be very helpful. It's really hard to use, but if you do have a warden where the target has moved away, it can be used defensively, and you can stand here and use it defensively and plug away at the target from range, which can be very, very good. Additionally, this is a combo field whirl. Now, I haven't mentioned this yet, but the Temporal Curtain is a combo field light, and that's the first combo field light and the only one that Mesmers have access to. So if I put the light combo field directly on the feet of the Illusionary Warden, which I'll do right now, you will get a whirl finisher in a light combo field, which is it's called Cleansing Bolts. And what the Cleansing Bolts do is these lightning bolts that you see here, and they remove conditions from friends. So they'll hop into friends and remove conditions from them, while also, if the warden is in melee range from something, it will deal damage. Additionally, if you put an ethereal combo field down instead, what will happen is you'll get confusing bolts, and confusing bolts will deal confusion in an AoE to anything around the warden. So if the warden does its attack inside inside an ethereal combo field, you can see that it's adding confusion to mobs in the vicinity. Now, it's not guaranteed which ones will get confusion and which ones will not, but it does do it in an AoE. It can be very, very helpful. So the Focus is fairly nuanced. There's a lot of things going on. There's a light combo field, which is the only one that you have access to. There's this pulling ability, so you can pull guys closer to your warden so that your warden can deal extra damage. And then there's the warden itself, which has a lot of damage potential if something is standing still, and it also has the whirl combo finisher and the reflective bubble. The Focus is one of my favorite offhand weapons, especially for solo leveling and for PvE in certain scenarios. I use it while leveling primarily as the major offhand that I have access to for this particular reason. Also, when you're leveling, you can put the Focus thing, the Temporal Curtain down and get swiftness for about 10 seconds. And since it's only on a 20-second cooldown or 25-second cooldown, it's almost almost half of the time you have swiftness up, which is pretty good. Very nice for getting around those large zones. I give the focus a solid A minus. It's not perfect and it's not usable in every scenario, but the Phantasm is definitely the most interesting Phantasm that the Mesmers have access to, and Temporal Curtain, if you get very good, can be used in some very interesting ways. Now we'll move on to two-handed weapons. There are only two of them, and the first one I'd like to discuss is the Greatsword. One feature of the Greatsword is that it is better the farther away you are from a target. So if I'm really close to this heavy target golem and shoot the #1 ability, I'm going to do 177 damage per tick. It does, Spatial Surge does 3 hits of damage. So once you cast it, it will do all 3 at the same time. And while as I'm close here, this only is doing 139 damage. But if I go further away, you can see that the base damage of 211, and then if I go even further to almost max range, it's a little far, it does about 260, 468 on a crit. So depending on how far away you are from the target, the ability gets better and better. The #2 ability on this Greatsword is Mirror Blade. Now, it's the only combo finisher that the Greatsword has access to, and it's a physical projectile combo finisher. So the first, I'll just use it here, and what it does is essentially it throws the sword. Now, the thing about this is that it's, again, bad for you, good for me. The sword will bounce between enemies and friends. When it hits friends, it gives them 3 stacks of might, and when it hits enemies, it gives them 3 stacks of vulnerability. So if I toss it at a non-occupied target golem like this, what you'll see is the sword actually is going to bounce back and forth. It bounced between us twice, so this got 6 stacks of vulnerability, and I got 6 stacks of might. That's not always going to happen. For example, if you are in an AoE situation, and you throw the sword, it's actually going to preferentially bounce to enemies. So you'll see that here, oh, well, this guy was right there. So this guy got some might, and this target golem got, a couple stacks of vulnerability. So let me see if I can do it inside here. There, you can see that that was me shattering. You can see that it does bounce around a few times. The next ability is called Mind Stab, and it looks really, really cool. The Mesmer throws their sword into the ground, and a purple sword spits up out of the ground and does some damage. This ability is really hard to use. They changed it during the beta. It used to just cast right on the target no matter where they were, but now it's a reticle ability, which means that you have to place it before you use it. You are also rooted, so if I'm using it while I run here, I have to stop in order to cast a spell. Now, it does 600, 700 damage in a full power build, not that much in comparison to some of the other abilities. Even Spatial Surge is going to do more damage if you're far away, and you get a crit or 2 on it. So it's not so great in terms of its damage output, but it also removes a boon from the target, which is really nice. Now, the boon removal is situational, and the movement is also fairly situational. It's hard to use, and often I find myself not using it because it's not worth me sacrificing, to stand still. The spell isn't powerful enough to justify standing still, which is a legitimate concern, and I actually think that this spell needs to be buffed a little bit to give it some increased power. The Phantasm that the Mesmer summons on this weapon is called the Phantasmal Berserker. So if I summon it on a faraway target here, you can see that it does massive amounts of damage. And the reason why, if we look at what it's doing, is it does a spinning sword attack similar to what warriors do on their great swords. And it hits all targets in its vicinity. It doesn't need to be targeted on any of them. It will do it towards the target that you cast on, however. So anything in between will get hit. It is somewhat hard to use, and you can see sometimes, like right there, 300 or 700 each, it's based on how close the target is to the Berserker, and the Berserker does a swing on each pass. It does multiple swings on each pass, I should say, and those multiple swings can or cannot hit the target. Sometimes it will just swing and completely whiff on the target, which is a little frustrating. As you can see there, it didn't really do as much damage. One of the nice things that it does do, however, in compensation for the fact that it doesn't reliably deal damage, is that it cripples the target. So as long as it hits once, the target gets crippled. And that can be very good when you're kiting, or when you're chasing something down. So it is synergistic with the concept of Spatial Surge in that if you want to be far away and you start attacking a mob, you want to cast the Phantasm fairly soon. It might even be the first thing that you do cast, maybe the second after a Mirror Blade, so that the mob doesn't go for the Phantasm right away, but it keeps you far away so that you can Spatial Surge the target and make sure that the target dies. The final ability on the sword is on the Greatsword is called Illusionary Wave, and this is something that's pretty straightforward, and it's also synergistic with Spatial Surge, and all it is just a knockback, so it just pushes targets back a decent amount, about 450 range. And that's pretty helpful. Again, if something closes with you, you can use it to push back. In PvP, you can use it to push people off cliffs, so or world versus world. So if you're on an edge like this, you can maneuver yourself sort of around a target and then push this button and knock people off, which is super helpful. Ultimately, the sword is a pretty solid AoE weapon. It's great for dynamic events, the Greatsword, especially because of the Berserker. You can see how fast and how much damage it does. And anytime it crits on the target, so if during a pass it crits twice, it can get multiple stacks of bleeding. And you can see that there are several stacks of bleeding here that go onto the target. So you can, and this subsequent bleeding is just from, again, traits, but it's a good indicator of which targets got crit and how hard they did. But you just see there, like, it really messed up and didn't hit as hard on that one golem and didn't hit any of the others. So again, not so reliable. Overall, I'd give the sword a solid B+. The Greatsword, a solid B+. I think it's a good weapon. I think that if Mind Stab were to get fixed in some way, then it would become a top tier weapon. But I'm a little wary of it just because not being able to use Mind Stab as often as I'd like really hinders its progress. I'd like either to see the damage increased, or if you can continue to move while casting it and putting the reticle down, that would probably push this weapon to the next level. The last weapon we'll discuss is the Staff, which is my favorite weapon that the Mesmer has access to. The number one ability on the Staff is not actually a chain, but it's called Winds of Chaos, and it bounces an orb between foes and allies, and it applies random boons to good guys and random conditions to bad guys. So if I start casting it, you can see that the base damage on the spell itself is extremely low. It's 199 or so, 203 in this particular case. And as I cast it, you can see that burning, well, we don't see burning yet, but bleeding and vulnerability are being stacked up on the target. And as the ball bounces back to me, I'm getting stacks of might, and I'm keeping Fury up. So you can see that this isn't a particularly high damage spell, especially because you can't reliably tell what condition you're going to be applying to the target. Sometimes it's burning, and that's usually just one tick, and the bleeding will stay on, and if you're lucky, it can continue to climb up. So people see this spell and they think that it's crap, and they don't want to do anything with it because it's a really big turnoff for most people. Where the Staff starts to shine, however, is in its clone, which is summoned by Phase Retreat. So Phase Retreat is a spell where you teleport backwards and you create a clone. So there's the clone. Now, the nice thing is that the clone actually casts the exact same spell that I was casting, which is Winds of Chaos. Unlike every other clone, this gives these particular clones the potential to do a lot of damage. Now, in the specs before, or in the trait choices that I've chosen before, the clones were making critical strikes and adding bleeding. And this, if you choose that, would still happen if these clones were to crit. But in addition to that, the spell adds random conditions onto the target as well. So if you get lots of clones up, for example, if I put 4 up, you can see that the stacks of conditions that add onto the target start becoming extremely powerful. And I have 10 stacks of might right now because I'm receiving the bounce from all of the spells when they come back to me, which makes the conditions do lots and lots more damage. So I was going up to 10 stacks of might there. The potential for damage on the Staff then, if you're using clones, is very high. The Phantasm that the Staff summons also is really strong. I said really a lot there, but I do mean it. The reason why is because it deals a decent amount of damage on its own, about 1100 just in a single shot. But what it also does is that damage is increased for each unique condition that's on the target. Now, I don't have very much power in this particular build, but so it's only doing about 900 on the heavy golem. But on a boss that has all of the conditions in the game on it, this can do upwards of 2,000 to 3,000 easily per hit, and it casts fairly quickly. So the Phantasm is very synergistic with the rest of the weapon. Now, I haven't mentioned this yet, but the clone summoning ability on Phase Retreat is actually a leap combo field. And the reason why I'm mentioning this now is because the fourth ability on the weapon is Chaos Armor. Now we've seen Chaos Armor several times. If you cast it, it's a nice purple ball, so it's very, very easy to see. And what Chaos Armor does is, again, it's bad for you and good for me. You're guaranteed to get protection when you cast Chaos Armor. I know that the tooltip doesn't say that. It says gives random boons and your foe random conditions when you are struck. However, it absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, always gives protection. And that is simply because the devs posted this, but they haven't, I guess, changed the tooltip yet. It also will give regeneration and swiftness if you get struck. Additionally, if you get struck, your foes will get confusion, cripple, and blind. So what that means is that when you cast it, you're getting protection absolutely no matter what, which is great. If your foes hit you, they will either get confusion, which means that the next strike will hurt them, or they'll get crippled, which means that you can run away, or they'll get blinded, which means that their next strike will completely miss. Additionally, if you get struck, you can also get regeneration, which means that you start to heal, or swiftness, which means that you can run away a little bit quicker. Chaos Armor, in my opinion, is one of the stronger, like, wizard armors that there are in the game. There's, like, fire as well. But this one, I think, is actually the strongest, and I really recommend that you use it quite a lot. So, as we mentioned before, if we put down an ethereal combo field and use a leap finisher, then you get Chaos Armor. And this is something that you're going to do a lot with the staff. As a matter of fact, I recommend that anytime that you use phase retreat, you should actually try to be in an ethereal combo field. And if you're using the staff properly with a condition damage build, which it doesn't have to be used that way, but if you are using it that way, you are casting lots of phase retreats. And this brings us to the last ability, which is Chaos Storm. Now, this is, again, a very, very obvious bad for you, good for me spell. It's a magical storm that looks amazing, and what it does is it puts poison, weakness, chilled, and daze. So basically, it hinders healing, hinders damage, slows guys down, and stops them from doing things, which is all fantastic. But what it also does is it gives you swiftness and retaliation, but it gives Aegis. And this is something that I think is highly misunderstood about the staff, is that Aegis essentially allows you to block another attack. Now, people are really into taking Guardians into PvE groups these days, because Guardians have, as part of their class mechanics, the ability to give Aegis to everybody in the group on a button press. And they also add Aegis once every 40 seconds to everybody, just statically, without any effort whatsoever. Chaos Storm is better than that. There, I said it. Chaos Storm is better than the Guardian tree for Aegis, at least in some scenarios. Specifically because Chaos Storm actually allows multiple blocks, and it happens often. People don't really use Chaos Storm defensively. They'll go into a group of mobs and cast Chaos Storm. And you'll see, I mean, okay, it does some damage, and the poison ticks are doing some damage too, but I mean, that's not impressive at all. And the ticks of poison aren't impressive either. The real damage comes from, the real effectiveness of Chaos Storm comes from the usage of it on yourself and using it to block attacks. If you're in a dungeon group, for example, or just yourself in PvP or soloing, you can cast this ability on your allies, and they'll block attacks. They can block 2 attacks for the duration of the Chaos Storm. It happens all the time. And I have a video clip that I'll show of this in a minute so that you can see what it looks like in action. Additionally, when your clones are up, they're very, very weak. Clones usually get 1 or 2 shot by mobs, and if you happen to put Chaos Storm on you and your clones if a melee mob closes with you, and that's really the way that you should be using it, is Chaos Storm should be used when an enemy and yourself are in the vicinity. Then the enemy will get all of these debuffs happening to them, and you will get copies of Aegis. You can see here that Aegis got refreshed several times, and it lasts for a long time as well, which means that it's a tremendous defensive spell. This is an absolutely incredible defensive spell. Additionally, if you are in Chaos Storm and you leap out of it, you'll get Chaos Armor on top of that. Or if you're in Chaos Storm and then switch to the Torch and then blast it, you'll give Chaos Armor to everybody, which means that everyone standing in the storm gets Aegis and Chaos Armor. So people don't think that Mesmers are good at support, but if a Mesmer has a staff and knows what they're doing, then they're able to really support people really, really well. So, and in addition, if you have clones up, what you can do is you can actually do lots of damage in addition. Now the damage has to ramp up for a little bit, but once the clones start getting to, you know, a level where the bleeds are really stacking very high, you're going to end up doing quite a lot of damage. Additionally, the melee guy that's attacking this mob is going to get all of those lovely stacks of might. Now, I'm not attacking myself here as well, but if I were attacking, then this mob would be really going down very, very quickly. So all in all, I think the staff is an A+ weapon. It's my favorite weapon. It's probably the strongest weapon that Mesmers have, but it is also the most nuanced and the most misunderstood. I really think that if you're playing solo as a leveling Mesmer, you should be using the staff because it adds power to your clones, and the Phantasm that summoned is extremely strong, and it's a tremendous defensive weapon. Probably the best defensive weapon that Mesmers have access to, not just for you, but for your allies as well. Thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you found out some useful information in part 1. The next videos I release will hopefully not be anywhere near as long, so if you are daunted by the length of this video, fear not. For those of you who are currently leveling, part 2 is going to be coming out soon, and it's going to cover the build I used for leveling, and some techniques on how best to take advantage of the skills that I chose. I want to get this particular video out sooner rather than later, because I know a lot of people are still leveling up. After that, I plan on doing a review of my utility skills, traits, and then some other possible builds that Mesmers can use. Again, thank you for watching. Please leave feedback